Imagine waking before sunrise every day of your life, not because an alarm clock rings, but because your family's survival depends on every hour of daylight. You live in a small village somewhere within the vast Roman Empire, perhaps in Italy, perhaps in Gaul, perhaps in Hispania or North Africa. The exact location hardly matters. Your life will look remarkably similar to that of millions of other peasants scattered across Rome's enormous territories. You own few possessions. Your home is simple. Most of your meals consist of bread, porridge, and whatever vegetables your family can grow. You have likely never seen Rome itself. You may never travel farther than 20 miles from the place where you were born. Yet despite this humble existence, your labor helps sustain one of the most powerful empires in human history. When we think of ancient Rome, we usually think of emperors like Augustus and Trajan. We think of generals conquering distant lands. We think of gladiators fighting in grand arenas and senators debating in marble halls. But these people represented only a tiny fraction of Roman society. The overwhelming majority of Romans were ordinary farmers, laborers, shepherds, craftsmen, and villagers. Their names rarely appear in history books. No statues were erected in their honor, few left behind written records. And yet, without them, the Roman Empire could never have existed. This is the story of those forgotten people, the men, women, and children who worked the land, paid the taxes, raised the families, and carried the burden of empire on their shoulders. This is the story of the Roman peasant. The year is 120 AD. Rome is near the height of its power. The Emperor Trajan has recently expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. Roman roads stretch across continents. Trade flows from Britain to Egypt. The cities are prosperous. But for the average peasant, these grand achievements mean little. A child born into a peasant family enters a world filled with uncertainty. The first challenge is simply surviving infancy. Modern medicine does not exist. There are no antibiotics, no vaccines, no understanding of germs. A simple infection can become deadly. Many children never reach adulthood. For Roman parents, the death of a child is tragically common. Life expectancy figures can be misleading. While many people imagine Romans dying in their 30s, the reality is more complex. The average is pulled down by extremely high infant mortality. Those who survive childhood may live into their 50s, 60s, or beyond. But first, they must survive the dangerous early years. A newborn enters a household where every resource matters. Food is limited. Labor is essential. Every additional family member represents both another mouth to feed and another potential worker. The child's future is largely determined at birth. Unlike the wealthy elites of Rome, peasant children have little opportunity for formal education. Most will spend their lives doing the same work as their parents. A farmer's son becomes a farmer. A shepherd's daughter helps tend animals. The rhythms of life are established early. By the age of 6 or 7, children begin helping with daily tasks. Girls fetch water, grind grain, and assist with household chores. Boys guard livestock, gather firewood, and accompany their fathers into the fields. Childhood, as we understand it today, barely exists. The family needs workers, and every pair of hands matters. Most Romans do not live in cities. Despite the grandeur of Rome itself, the empire remains overwhelmingly rural. Across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, countless villages dot the landscape. A typical peasant village might contain only a few dozen families. The homes are clustered together for security and convenience, fields spread outward in every direction. The village is surrounded by the land that sustains it. At first glance, the settlement appears modest. The houses are small. Many are constructed from mud brick, timber, or rough stone. Roofs may be covered with thatch or clay tiles depending on local resources and wealth. The interior is dark. Windows are small or non-existent. Smoke from cooking fires often fills the living space. Furniture is sparse, a few stools, a table, storage jars, perhaps a chest containing the family's most valuable possessions. Most people sleep on simple straw mattresses. Privacy is almost unknown. Several generations may share the same building. Outside, the village is alive with activity. Women grind grain using heavy stone mills. Children chase chickens through narrow pathways. Dogs bark. Goats wander freely. Blacksmiths repair tools. Farmers discuss weather conditions and harvest prospects. The smells are powerful. Fresh bread, animal manure, wood smoke, olive oil, sweat. Life is crowded, noisy, and deeply connected to the natural world. Unlike modern communities, villages depend heavily on one another. Neighbors help build homes, they share tools, they assist during harvests. When disaster strikes, cooperation may mean the difference between survival and starvation. Yet village life is not always harmonious. Arguments over land, water, livestock, and debts are common. Human nature has changed little over 2,000 years. People celebrate together, work together, and sometimes fight with one another. Still, the village remains the center of existence. Most peasants will spend nearly their entire lives within sight of the same hills, fields, and roads. The wider empire exists largely as a distant concept. Rome is represented by tax collectors, local officials, and occasional soldiers passing through. For the average peasant, the village is the world, and tomorrow, before dawn, work will begin again. If there was one thing that dominated the thoughts of a Roman peasant more than anything else, it was food. Not politics, not war, not the emperor. Food. Every morning began with it. Every season revolved around it. Every decision was influenced by it. In the modern world, many people rarely think about where their next meal will come from. Food arrives from supermarkets, restaurants, and delivery services. A poor harvest on the other side of the country is unlikely to affect what appears on a dinner table. For the Roman peasant, life was very different. Food security was never guaranteed. A family could work hard for an entire year and still face hunger if drought, disease, insects, or bad weather destroyed the harvest. Survival depended upon the land, and the land could be unforgiving. To understand the life of a Roman peasant, we must first understand what they ate. The foundation of the Roman diet was grain. Grain was not merely an important food source, it was life itself. Across the empire, farmers cultivated wheat, barley, millet, and other cereals suited to local climates. These crops formed the backbone of both rural and urban diets. Every year, vast portions of the countryside were devoted to growing grain. Fields stretched across rolling hills and fertile valleys, worked by farmers using methods that had changed little for centuries. The harvest determined everything. A successful harvest meant security. A poor harvest meant fear. Most grain did not become the loaves of bread we recognize today. Instead, much of it was consumed as porridge, simple, filling, and inexpensive. A typical peasant breakfast might consist of a thick grain porridge prepared over a small fire. It was not particularly exciting, but it provided calories, and calories meant survival. Bread was common as well, though its quality varied greatly. The wealthy enjoyed finely milled white bread. Peasants usually ate darker, coarser loaves made from less refined flour. The grinding process itself was labor-intensive. Before grain could become bread, it first had to be milled. This task often fell to women and children. Hour after hour, they pushed heavy grinding stones, turning grain into flour. It was exhausting work. Yet, it had to be done almost daily. Without flour, there was no bread, and without bread, there was no meal. For many peasant families, bread accompanied nearly every meal. It served as a utensil, a source of calories, and often the centerpiece of the dining experience. When little else was available, bread alone might sustain a family through difficult times. Fortunately, grain was not the only food available. Vegetables played a significant role in the peasant diet. Cabbage, onions, leeks, beans, lentils, turnips, and garlic were commonly grown in household gardens. These small plots provided valuable nutrition and supplemented the family's grain supply. Many Roman peasants maintained kitchen gardens near their homes. Every available patch of land was utilized. Nothing could be wasted. These gardens supplied food throughout much of the year and helped families survive when harvests were poor. Legumes were particularly important. Beans and lentils offered protein that was otherwise difficult to obtain. For many peasants, they represented the closest thing to a reliable source of nutrition beyond grain. Meat, contrary to popular imagination, was relatively rare. Most peasant families owned few animals, and those animals served purposes beyond food. A goat produced milk, a sheep provided wool, an ox helped plough fields. Slaughtering such animals was often an expensive decision. As a result, meat was generally reserved for special occasions. Religious festivals, weddings, harvest celebrations, community gatherings. For much of the year, ordinary peasants consumed little meat at all. When they did, it was often in small quantities. A bit of salted pork, some sausage, perhaps a stew stretched with vegetables and grain. Fish was more common in coastal regions and near rivers. For communities living close to water, fishing provided a valuable supplement to the diet. Elsewhere, fish remained an occasional luxury. One product, however, appeared nearly everywhere: olive oil. Olive oil was one of the defining ingredients of the Mediterranean world. It was used for cooking, for preserving food, for lighting lamps, even for personal hygiene. In many regions, olive trees represented wealth and stability. An olive grove could produce harvests for generations. Wine was also widespread. Contrary to modern assumptions, wine was not reserved solely for the wealthy. People across Roman society consumed it regularly. However, peasant wine differed significantly from the refined vintages enjoyed by aristocrats. It was often watered down, sometimes sour, occasionally mixed with herbs or other ingredients. Nevertheless, it provided hydration and calories. In a world where water quality could be unreliable, diluted wine was often considered safer to drink. Despite these food sources, hunger remained a constant threat. The Roman Empire possessed impressive infrastructure. Roads connected distant provinces, ships transported grain across the Mediterranean, markets linked producers and consumers, Yet these systems could not eliminate the risks faced by individual farming families. A drought could destroy crops, an early frost could ruin harvests, a swarm of insects might devastate entire fields. When disaster struck, the consequences were severe. Food prices rose rapidly, families reduced meal sizes, livestock might be sold to purchase grain, savings disappeared, and if conditions failed to improve, starvation became a real possibility. Historical records occasionally describe famines that affected entire regions. For peasants, such events were terrifying. The difference between survival and catastrophe could be measured in a few weeks of rainfall. In these difficult times, communities relied on one another. Neighbors shared food when possible. Families gathered wild plants. Acorns, berries, nuts, and edible roots became important emergency resources. Nothing that could provide nourishment was ignored. Yet even during hardship, daily life continued. Fields still required attention. Animals still needed care. Children still needed feeding. The struggle for food was relentless. It shaped every aspect of existence. Today, archaeologists uncover traces of this ancient diet through charred seeds, animal bones, pottery fragments, and food residues preserved in the soil. These discoveries paint a remarkably consistent picture. Most Roman peasants lived modestly, their meals were simple, their diets were repetitive, and much of their energy was devoted to securing enough food to reach the next harvest. As the sun set over the countryside and families gathered around small cooking fires, they could not know what the following year would bring. Perhaps abundant harvests, perhaps drought, perhaps prosperity, perhaps hunger. The future rested in the hands of weather, fortune, and the land itself, and tomorrow, before dawn, they would return to the fields once more. Because in the Roman world, survival was not achieved once. It had to be earned every single day. Long before the first rays of sunlight touched the fields, the Roman peasant was already awake. There were no alarm clocks, no schedules posted on a wall, no supervisors demanding attendance. Nature itself determined the rhythm of life. The seasons, the weather, and the rising sun governed every working day. For most peasants, labor began at dawn and ended only when darkness made further work impossible. The Roman Empire was, at its heart, an agricultural civilization. Its cities, armies, and governments depended upon the productivity of countless farms scattered across the countryside. Every loaf of bread consumed in Rome, every military campaign launched on a distant frontier, and every grand construction project undertaken by the state relied upon the labor of ordinary farmers. Without them, the empire could not function. Yet the work itself was neither glamorous nor easy. It was physically exhausting, repetitive, and often dangerous. A peasant's most valuable possession was not land, livestock, or even tools. It was the ability to work. An injury could be devastating. A broken leg, a severe illness, or a damaged hand could threaten an entire family's survival. There were no disability payments, no insurance, no safety net. If you could not work, someone else had to carry your burden, and in many cases that burden was already heavy enough. As dawn approached, the household slowly came to life. The first task was often feeding the animals. Chickens needed attention. Goats required milking. Sheep had to be gathered and inspected. Oxen, if the family possessed them, were especially valuable. These powerful animals provided the muscle necessary to plow fields that would otherwise require enormous human effort. An ox was more than livestock, it was an investment, a partner in survival. After a simple breakfast, often consisting of bread, porridge, or leftovers from the previous day, the family prepared for work. Everyone had a role. Men, women, and children all contributed. While certain tasks were divided by age and gender, survival demanded flexibility. When harvest season arrived, everyone worked. The fields did not care about social expectations. They demanded labor from whoever was available. The tools available to Roman farmers were simple by modern standards. Wooden plows reinforced with iron, hoes, spades, sickles, axes, pruning knives. Most had changed little over generations. Mechanization did not exist. Every task depended on human or animal muscle. Ploughing was among the most demanding jobs. A farmer guided the plough while animals pulled it through the soil. The process was slow and physically exhausting. Field after field had to be prepared before planting could begin. The work required patience. The earth did not yield easily. Rocks had to be removed, roots cut away, furrows carefully maintained. A mistake made during planting could affect an entire year's harvest. Once the seeds were sown, attention shifted to maintenance. Weeds competed with crops for nutrients. Pests threatened young plants. Fences required repair. Irrigation systems, where available, needed constant monitoring. Agriculture was not a single event. It was a continuous cycle of labor stretching across the entire year. The seasons dictated what work needed to be done. Spring was a season of preparation and hope. Fields were planted, gardens expanded, animals gave birth. The countryside came alive with activity. Every farmer understood that the coming months would determine the family's fortunes. Summer brought long days and relentless labor. The Mediterranean sun could be unforgiving. Workers spent hours beneath the heat, tending crops and maintaining property. Sweat-soaked clothing, hands developed calluses, skin darkened under constant exposure. Yet there was little opportunity to rest. The crops demanded attention. Autumn was the most important season of all. Harvest time had arrived. Months of labor would now be tested. Entire families entered the fields. Neighbors often assisted one another. Every available hand was needed. Grain had to be cut before storms ruined it. Olives needed collecting. Grapes required harvesting. The workload was enormous. But so too were the stakes. A successful harvest meant security through the winter. A poor harvest meant uncertainty, perhaps even disaster. Harvest season transformed the countryside into a frenzy of activity. From sunrise until sunset, workers moved through the fields. The sound of sickles cutting grain filled the air. Carts creaked beneath heavy loads. Children gathered loose stalks left behind by adults. Every grain mattered. Nothing was wasted. Once harvested, crops had to be processed and stored. Grain was dried and protected from moisture. Olives were crushed for oil. Grapes were pressed into wine. Storage was a constant concern. Rot, mold, rodents, theft. Each posed a threat to the family's hard-earned resources. Winter brought a different rhythm. The fields rested, but the work did not disappear. Tools required maintenance. Buildings needed repair. Animals still demanded care. Firewood had to be collected. Clothing had to be mended. Winter was also a season of uncertainty. Food stores gradually diminished. Families carefully monitored their supplies. Every meal represented one step closer to spring. The danger was not merely running out of food. Disease often spread more easily during colder months. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. A harsh winter could devastate a community already struggling after a poor harvest. For those fortunate enough to own their land, life was difficult. For tenant farmers, it could be even harder. Across much of the empire, peasants worked land owned by wealthy landlords in exchange for access to the fields. Tenants paid rent through crops, labor, or money. A portion of the harvest never belonged to the people who produced it. This reality shaped rural life across generations. The laborer who spent months cultivating a field might ultimately surrender a significant share of its output. To modern observers, this arrangement may seem unfair. To Roman peasants, it was simply part of life. The social hierarchy appeared as natural as the changing seasons. Yet even amid hardship, there were moments of satisfaction. A healthy field of grain swaying in the wind, the birth of a calf, a successful olive harvest, rain arriving after weeks of drought. Small victories carried enormous significance because farmers understood something that city dwellers often forgot. Human beings could make plans, governments could issue orders, emperors could command armies, but ultimately, survival still depended upon forces beyond anyone's control: the weather, the soil, the seasons, the land. And so, year after year, generation after generation, Roman peasants continued their work. They ploughed, they planted, they harvested, they endured. Their labor fed cities they would never visit, supported governments they would never meet, and sustained an empire that stretched across 3 continents. The monuments of Rome still stand today. The names of emperors fill history books. But behind every triumph of the Roman world stood countless farmers whose names have been forgotten. Their work left few records. Yet, it was among the most important labor ever performed. For without the peasant, there could be no empire. And tomorrow, as the first light appeared over the horizon, the work would begin again.
For a Roman peasant, life was rarely lived alone. From birth until death, individuals existed as part of a household. The family was not simply a source of affection or companionship. It was the foundation of survival. Every member of the household contributed to the family's success. Every member shared its hardships. When crops failed, everyone suffered. When harvests were abundant, everyone benefited. In many ways, the Roman family functioned less like a modern household and more like a small economic enterprise. Each person had responsibilities. Each person had work to do. And every pair of hands mattered. Marriage stood at the center of this system. Modern audiences often associate marriage with romantic love, personal fulfillment, and individual choice. For Roman peasants, however, marriage was primarily a practical arrangement. Love could certainly develop. Many couples undoubtedly formed deep emotional bonds over the years. But the decision to marry was usually driven by economic realities. A husband gained a partner who could help manage the household, prepare food, raise children, care for animals, and contribute to countless daily tasks. A wife gained security, protection, and access to resources that might otherwise be difficult to obtain. Together, they increased their chances of survival. The exact age at which people married varied across the empire. Women often married younger than men. A young woman might enter marriage in her mid to late teens. Men generally married somewhat later, often after establishing themselves economically. For peasants, however, circumstances frequently dictated timing. A family in need of labor might encourage an earlier marriage. Economic hardship might delay it. There was no single Roman experience. Life varied considerably from region to region, yet across the empire, marriage remained one of the most important transitions in a person's life. The wedding itself was often modest. Unlike the elaborate celebrations enjoyed by wealthy Romans, peasant weddings tended to be simple affairs. Family members gathered, food was shared, religious customs were observed, and a new household began. For many couples, married life started with very little. A small home, a few tools, perhaps a handful of animals. The future would depend largely upon their ability to work together. Within the household, responsibilities were divided according to both tradition and necessity. Men generally performed the heaviest agricultural labor. They plowed fields, maintained fences, constructed buildings, managed larger livestock. Women oversaw many of the household's daily operations. They prepared meals, produced clothing, ground grain, managed food storage, raised children, cared for smaller animals. Yet these divisions were never absolute. Peasant life rarely allowed for rigid specialization. During harvest season, everyone entered the fields. When additional labor was required, traditional boundaries often disappeared. Survival mattered more than custom. The workload carried by women was especially significant. A Roman peasant woman might spend much of her day engaged in physically demanding tasks. Grinding grain alone could consume several hours. Water often had to be carried from wells or streams. Clothing was produced by hand. Meals required constant preparation. Children required supervision. Animals required care. And throughout it all, the household had to continue functioning. Much of this labor went unnoticed by historians. Ancient writers were often wealthy men who paid little attention to the daily routines of ordinary women. Yet without their contributions, rural communities could not have survived. Children quickly became part of this system. From a young age, boys and girls were expected to contribute. A small child might gather firewood, watch younger siblings, feed chickens, carry water. As they grew older, responsibilities increased. By modern standards, many Roman children would appear to have entered adulthood remarkably early. But necessity left little room for prolonged childhood. Families needed workers, and children represented the future labor force of both the household and the empire. Parents understood that not all of their children would survive to adulthood. Disease remained a constant threat. Accidents were common. Medical knowledge was limited. The death of a child was a tragedy experienced by countless Roman families. Archaeological discoveries reveal small graves scattered throughout the empire, silent reminders of lives cut short before they had truly begun. Yet despite these hardships, parents clearly cared deeply for their children. Ancient inscriptions sometimes preserve heartbreaking messages left by grieving mothers and fathers. Even among the poor, love and loss were powerful forces. The realities of life did not diminish human emotion. If anything, they often intensified it. The authority structure within the household reflected broader Roman values. Traditionally, the oldest male exercised considerable authority over family affairs. Roman law granted fathers extensive legal powers. In practice, however, peasant households often operated through cooperation rather than strict command. The demands of daily life encouraged practical decision-making. A successful family required teamwork. No single individual could manage every responsibility alone. As years passed, households frequently expanded. Multiple generations might live under the same roof or in neighboring homes. Grandparents contributed labor when able. They also provided knowledge and experience. In a largely illiterate society, wisdom was passed down through observation and memory. How to predict weather patterns. When to plant crops. How to preserve food. Which herbs might ease illness. Knowledge accumulated over decades could be invaluable. For elderly peasants, old age was both a blessing and a challenge. Reaching advanced age meant surviving countless dangers. Yet aging bodies struggled with the physical demands of rural life. Families often cared for elderly relatives as best they could. In return, older family members continued contributing through childcare, household tasks, and advice. The cycle of life continued. Children became adults. Adults became parents. Parents became grandparents. Generations followed one another with remarkable consistency. Empires expanded and contracted. Emperors rose and fell. Wars were fought on distant frontiers. But in villages across the Roman world, families continued much as they always had. Working, marrying, raising children, growing old, and preparing the next generation to do the same. For the Roman peasant, the family was more than a social institution. It was a source of labor, a source of security, a source of identity, and often the only protection against an uncertain world. In a society where survival depended upon cooperation, family was not merely important, it was everything. And while the household provided support in the physical world, Roman peasants also sought protection from forces they could not see. The gods watched over every field, every home, and every family. Or so they believed. To understand the Roman peasant fully, we must now step beyond the visible world and explore the realm of religion, superstition, and faith.
To the modern mind, religion is often something separate from daily life. It may be practiced on certain days, in certain places, or during certain ceremonies. For the Roman peasant, however, religion was woven into every aspect of existence. The boundary between the natural and supernatural was often blurred. The gods were everywhere. They watched over the household. They protected the fields. They influenced the weather. They determined fortune and misfortune. Whether a crop flourished or failed, whether a child survived an illness, whether a journey ended safely or in disaster, all could be attributed to forces beyond human control. The Roman peasant lived in a world filled with divine presence. Unlike modern religions centered around a single god, traditional Roman religion consisted of a vast network of deities, spirits, rituals, and local customs. Some gods were worshipped throughout the empire. Others were known only within a single village or region. The religious landscape of Rome was remarkably diverse. As the empire expanded, it absorbed beliefs from conquered peoples. Egyptian gods found worshippers in Italy. Eastern mystery cults spread westward. Local traditions survived alongside official Roman practices. For ordinary peasants, however, religion was usually much closer to home. The most important sacred space was often not a grand temple. It was the household itself. Within many homes stood a small shrine dedicated to the family's protective spirits. These household gods, known as the Laras and Penates, watched over the family and its possessions. Simple offerings might be placed before them. A small portion of food, a cup of wine, a prayer for protection. These rituals required little wealth. Even the poorest families could participate. For many peasants, these household spirits were among the most familiar and trusted divine beings. Each day might begin or end with a brief act of devotion. The goal was not theological understanding, it was practical protection. The relationship between humans and gods was often viewed as an exchange. People offered respect, sacrifices, and prayers. In return, they hoped for divine favor, a healthy harvest, protection from disease, safe childbirth, good fortune. Success was evidence that the relationship was working. Failure suggested that something had gone wrong. Perhaps a ritual had been neglected. Perhaps the gods had been offended. Perhaps fate simply had other plans. Agriculture made peasants especially dependent on divine assistance. No amount of hard work could guarantee a successful harvest. Rainfall could not be controlled. Storms could not be prevented. Drought could not be negotiated with. The forces that shaped agricultural life seemed immense and unpredictable. Religion offered a way to make sense of this uncertainty. When rains arrived at the right moment, it felt like a blessing. When crops withered under a scorching sun, it could feel like punishment. Throughout the year, religious festivals punctuated the agricultural calendar. These celebrations provided opportunities for worship, community gatherings, and temporary relief from routine labor. Many festivals were tied directly to planting, harvesting, fertility, or seasonal transitions. The health of the land and the favor of the gods were deeply connected. Villagers gathered for sacrifices. Animals might be offered to the gods. Prayers were recited. Food was shared. For a brief time, the hardships of daily life gave way to celebration. Such events strengthened social bonds as well as spiritual ones. Religion helped unite communities. It reminded people that they faced life's uncertainties together. Yet formal religion was only part of the story. Alongside official beliefs existed a vast world of superstition. To Roman peasants, signs and omens could appear everywhere. The flight of birds, an unusual dream, a strange noise in the night, the behavior of animals. Each might carry hidden meaning. Many people believed that the gods communicated through signs. Interpreting those signs was not always easy. A sudden storm before planting season could be seen as a warning. An unexpected encounter on a journey might be viewed as an omen. Even seemingly ordinary events could acquire supernatural significance. The future felt uncertain. Omens offered clues about what lay ahead. Dreams held particular importance. Many Romans believed that dreams could reveal messages from divine forces. A vivid dream might be discussed with family members for days, its meaning debated and interpreted. Was it a warning? A promise? A sign of danger? Or merely a product of the mind? Few people could know for certain, but many believed it was worth paying attention. Magic also occupied an important place in popular belief. Today, the word may evoke images of fantasy and fiction. For Roman peasants, magical practices often appeared practical and entirely real. Protective charms were common. Amulets might be worn around the neck. Special symbols could be carved into objects. Certain words or prayers were believed to possess power. Some individuals gained reputations for healing, divination, or spiritual knowledge. Herbal remedies, folk traditions, and supernatural beliefs frequently blended together. The line between medicine and magic was often difficult to distinguish. If a child became ill, parents might seek both practical treatment and divine intervention. Why choose one when both might help? Fear of malevolent forces was equally widespread. Many Romans believed in curses. They feared the evil eye. They worried about hostile spirits, jealous neighbors, angry gods, unknown enemies. The world contained dangers both visible and invisible. Protective rituals offered reassurance. Whether they truly worked mattered less than the comfort they provided. Even death did not necessarily mark the end of spiritual concerns. The dead remained important members of the community. Families honored ancestors through rituals and remembrance. Many believed that the spirits of the deceased continued to influence the living. Proper burial practices mattered greatly. An improperly buried person might become restless. A forgotten ancestor might be offended. Respect for the dead formed another thread connecting the physical and spiritual worlds. By the 2nd century AD, new religious movements were beginning to spread throughout the empire. Among them was Christianity. At first, Christianity represented only a tiny minority. Most peasants would never encounter a Christian during their lifetimes. Yet the movement gradually expanded. Its message appealed to people across social classes: the promise of salvation, the hope of eternal life, the idea that all souls possessed value before God. These beliefs would eventually transform the Roman world. But during the period of our story, traditional religious practices still dominated rural life. Most peasants continued to worship as their parents and grandparents had. They honored local gods, observed traditional festivals, and sought divine favor in an uncertain world. To modern observers, some of these beliefs may seem strange, but it is important to remember the realities of peasant life. Disease appeared without warning. Storms destroyed crops. Children died young. Medical knowledge was limited. Life often felt unpredictable and fragile. Religion provided explanations. Superstition provided comfort. Faith provided hope. The gods might not solve every problem, but they helped people endure problems that otherwise seemed impossible to understand. As the sun set over a Roman village and smoke rose from cooking fires, countless families offered prayers to unseen powers. They asked for healthy children, good harvests, protection from misfortune, and another day of life. Because in a world filled with uncertainty, faith was often the only certainty available. Yet while peasants prayed to the gods for protection, another force shaped their lives just as powerfully. Unlike the gods, this force was very real. It collected taxes, demanded labor, enforced laws, and occasionally sent young men away to war. Its name was Rome. And for many peasants, the empire was felt most strongly through the burden of taxation and authority. For most Roman peasants, the empire was not a distant map stretching across 3 continents. It was not the triumphal arches that celebrated military victories. It was not the Senate debating in Rome, and it was certainly not the emperor himself. Most peasants would never see the capital. Many would never travel farther than a few days from their village. Yet despite this distance, Rome was a constant presence in their lives. Not through grand monuments, not through political speeches, but through taxes. Every harvest season, as grain was gathered and olives were pressed, a portion of what had been produced no longer belonged to the family that had worked for it. It belonged to someone else, a landlord, a local official, the state, or sometimes all 3. The Roman Empire required enormous resources to function. Armies had to be paid, roads had to be maintained, public officials required support, cities needed food. The machinery of empire consumed vast quantities of wealth, and much of that wealth ultimately came from the countryside. The burden was carried by ordinary farmers. To understand peasant life, it is important to recognize that not all peasants owned the land they worked. Some families possessed small plots that had been passed down through generations. Others rented land from wealthy landowners. Many lived somewhere between these 2 extremes. Across the empire, land ownership was highly unequal. A small number of wealthy individuals controlled enormous estates. Some owned thousands of acres. Others controlled multiple properties spread across different provinces. Meanwhile, countless peasants struggled to maintain farms that were barely large enough to support their families. This imbalance was not unique to Rome. It had existed in many societies throughout history. But for peasants, its consequences were very real. A tenant farmer might spend months cultivating fields only to surrender a significant portion of the harvest as rent. The grain they harvested, the olives they gathered, the wine they produced, all could be subject to claims from others. The better the harvest, the more there was to take. And when harvests were poor, obligations often remained. Nature did not excuse debts. Landlords rarely accepted bad weather as payment. The result was a constant balancing act. Families had to produce enough food for themselves while also meeting the demands imposed upon them. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they did not. Taxes varied throughout the empire and changed over time. Different provinces faced different obligations. Some taxes were paid in money, others were paid in goods. Grain was especially important. The great cities of the empire, particularly Rome itself, depended heavily on food produced far from their walls. Entire systems of taxation and transportation existed to move agricultural products from the countryside to urban populations. For peasants, however, the details mattered less than the outcome. Part of what they produced would be taken. That was simply a fact of life. The collection of taxes could be a source of anxiety. Most years families knew what was expected, but unexpected demands could create hardship. A poor harvest might leave little surplus, yet obligations still had to be met. When resources became scarce, difficult choices followed. Animals might be sold, tools exchanged for grain, savings depleted. Families sometimes entered cycles of debt from which they struggled to escape. Debt was one of the most dangerous threats facing a peasant household. A single bad year could be survived. Several bad years in succession could prove devastating. Loans offered temporary relief, but carried long-term risks. Interest accumulated. Repayment deadlines approached. And failure to meet obligations could result in the loss of land or property. For many families, financial security remained frustratingly fragile. The Roman government itself was represented locally through a network of officials. These men administered laws, collected taxes, resolved disputes, and maintained order. Most peasants interacted with government only occasionally. Yet those interactions could have significant consequences. A disagreement over land boundaries, a tax assessment, a legal dispute between neighbors. Such matters often brought ordinary people into contact with authority. Justice, however, was not always equal. Wealth and social status frequently influenced outcomes. A wealthy landowner possessed advantages unavailable to an ordinary farmer. Connections mattered. Influence mattered. Money mattered. This reality was well understood by rural communities. Most peasants accepted social hierarchy as a normal part of life. The rich possessed power. The poor possessed labor. That was simply how the world appeared to function. Yet acceptance did not necessarily mean satisfaction. Ancient sources occasionally preserve evidence of tension between peasants and elites. Complaints about taxes, disputes over land, resentment toward officials. These frustrations were hardly unique to Rome. Throughout history, those who work the land have often felt burdened by those who govern it. And yet the relationship was more complicated than simple exploitation. The empire also provided benefits. Roman roads improved transportation. Markets created opportunities for trade. Military forces offered protection from many external threats. Law and administration brought a degree of stability to vast territories. Even if peasants rarely thought about these advantages, they were part of the system that shaped daily life. The challenge was that benefits were often indirect. Taxes were immediate, rent was immediate, debt was immediate. The positive effects of imperial administration were more difficult to see. As a result, many peasants experienced Rome primarily through its demands rather than its rewards. Still, life continued. Fields were planted, children were raised, animals were cared for. The obligations of empire became woven into the routine of existence. Most people focused not on changing the system, but on surviving within it. They adapted. They endured. They worked harder when necessary. And they hoped that next year's harvest would be better than the last. For generations, this pattern repeated itself across the Roman world. Millions of ordinary people carried the economic burden that sustained one of history's greatest empires. Their taxes helped finance distant military campaigns. Their labor fed crowded cities. Their contributions supported institutions they would never see. Yet despite everything they gave to Rome, the empire sometimes demanded even more. Occasionally, it demanded sons, young men who would leave their villages behind and march away in service to the state. Some would return, many would not. And for peasant families, war could transform life in ways no tax collector ever could. For much of a Roman peasant's life, the empire existed at a distance. It appeared through tax collectors, through merchants traveling along Roman roads, through occasional government officials passing through the countryside. But sometimes the empire arrived in a much more personal way. Sometimes it came asking for soldiers. The Roman Empire was built by armies. From the mist-covered hills of Britain to the deserts of Syria, Roman soldiers guarded borders, suppressed rebellions, constructed roads, and enforced imperial authority. Their presence made the empire possible. Yet armies do not appear by magic. They must be recruited, trained, supplied, and most importantly, filled with men willing, or sometimes compelled, to serve. For peasant families, military service represented both an opportunity and a risk. A son who joined the army might gain status, steady pay, and opportunities unavailable in village life. He might return home with savings, land, citizenship, stories of distant lands, but he might also never return at all. To understand how extraordinary military service could seem, imagine the life of a young peasant in the 2nd century AD. He has spent nearly his entire life in the same region. He knows every field, every path, every neighboring village. His future appears largely predetermined. He will likely farm the same land his father farmed, marry someone from a nearby community, raise children, and spend the rest of his life where he was born. Then the army enters the picture. Suddenly, a different future becomes possible. Roman military service offered something rare in the ancient world: social mobility. The empire needed capable soldiers, and it was often willing to reward them. A young man with little property and few prospects might see enlistment as a path toward a better life. For others, the decision was less voluntary. The needs of the state could outweigh personal preferences. The exact methods of recruitment varied across different periods and provinces. But throughout Roman history, military service remained deeply connected to rural communities. After all, peasants represented one of the largest pools of available manpower. Many recruits came from farming backgrounds. Years of agricultural labor had already prepared them for physical hardship. They were accustomed to long days, difficult conditions, and demanding work. These qualities translated well to military life. Yet nothing could fully prepare a young farmer for his first journey away from home. For many recruits, enlistment meant traveling farther than they had ever imagined. A man born in Gaul might find himself stationed along the Danube. A recruit from Spain could be sent to Britain. Someone raised in North Africa might spend years on the empire's eastern frontier. The Roman army moved people across enormous distances. In doing so, it connected regions that would otherwise have remained largely isolated from one another. Life in the military was demanding. Roman soldiers trained relentlessly. They marched long distances carrying heavy equipment. They built roads, constructed forts, dug defensive trenches, maintained weapons, and prepared constantly for the possibility of conflict. Ancient writers often remarked that Roman victories were won through discipline as much as battlefield skill. Discipline required effort, and effort required sacrifice. The daily routine of military life could be exhausting. Yet compared to the uncertainty of peasant farming, the army offered certain advantages. Food was generally provided. Pay arrived regularly, though not always generously. Equipment was supplied. And for many recruits, the military offered a sense of purpose and identity. The army became a new family, a new community, a new way of life. For those left behind, however, military service could create hardship. Every young man who departed represented the loss of valuable labor. Farms depended on workers. Fields needed tending. Animals required care. A family already operating near the limits of its resources might struggle when one of its strongest members left. Parents worried, wives worried, siblings worried. Communication was slow and unreliable. Months might pass without news. Years could pass before a soldier returned home, and some families would never see their loved ones again. Death was an accepted reality of military service. Battle claimed lives. But combat was not the only danger. Disease often killed more soldiers than enemy weapons. Poor sanitation, contaminated water, harsh climates, and unfamiliar illnesses posed constant threats. A young recruit who survived years of farming might succumb to sickness thousands of miles from home. Even when soldiers survived their service, the experience changed them. They returned with new skills, new perspectives, and sometimes entirely new identities. A veteran who had spent decades serving on distant frontiers had seen more of the world than most peasants could imagine. He had encountered different languages, different religions, different customs. He had lived in bustling military settlements and crossed regions known only through rumor back home. The army exposed ordinary men to an empire far larger than their villages. Many veterans eventually received land grants or financial rewards. These benefits helped integrate former soldiers into provincial communities. Some returned to their birthplaces, others settled in entirely new regions. In either case, military service often left a lasting mark on local society. The influence of veterans could be felt long after they laid down their weapons. Not every peasant family viewed military service negatively. For some, a son joining the army represented a source of pride. The Roman military enjoyed considerable prestige. Its soldiers defended the empire and symbolized Roman power. Serving honorably brought respect. Families celebrated sons who succeeded in military careers. Yet pride and fear often existed side by side. Every departure carried uncertainty. No parent could know whether a farewell would be temporary or permanent. No wife could know whether her husband would return. No child could know whether they would grow up with a father present. War had a way of reaching far beyond the battlefield. Its consequences extended into homes, farms, and villages across the empire. And while military service connected peasants to the broader Roman world, it also exposed them to its dangers. The empire could reward loyalty, but it could not guarantee safety. For most peasants, survival remained the ultimate challenge. Whether in the fields or in military camps, life was fragile. A poor harvest, a severe illness, a battlefield wound, a sudden accident, any of these could end a life without warning. This reality was understood by every Roman family. Death was not a distant possibility. It was an ever-present companion. And to truly understand the life of a Roman peasant, we must now confront the shadow that followed them from birth to old age. The shadow of disease, suffering, and death. Death was everywhere. It waited in the fields. It lingered in crowded homes. It traveled along roads and trade routes. It hid in contaminated water. It arrived with fever, infection, accident, or age. For a Roman peasant, death was not an extraordinary event. It was part of life. Every family knew loss. Every village carried memories of those who had died too soon. Every generation learned to live alongside uncertainty. To understand the Roman peasant's world, we must abandon the assumptions of modern medicine. Today, a minor cut is often treated with antiseptic. A fever can be controlled with medication. An infection that once killed millions can be cured with antibiotics. Doctors understand germs, bacteria, and disease transmission. Roman peasants possessed none of these advantages. They lived in a world where even seemingly minor ailments could become deadly. A simple wound received while harvesting grain might become infected. A broken bone could leave a person permanently disabled. An illness that today would require only rest and medication might end a life within days. The greatest danger began at birth. Childbirth was among the most perilous experiences in the ancient world. Every pregnancy carried risk. Mothers died from complications. Infants died during delivery. Others survived only briefly. For peasant families, childbirth was both a moment of hope and a moment of fear. A healthy child represented the future. Another worker, another generation, another chance for the family to continue. But until mother and child survived the first difficult days, nothing was certain. The high mortality rate of children shaped family life in profound ways. Many parents would lose at least one child during their lifetime. Some would lose several. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, and infections claimed countless young lives. Archaeologists have uncovered cemeteries throughout the former Roman Empire where children's graves account for a significant portion of burials. These discoveries offer a sobering reminder of how fragile childhood could be. Yet despite the frequency of loss, parents did not become indifferent to it. Ancient inscriptions reveal deep affection between parents and children. Grief was real. Love was real. The pain of loss was no less intense simply because it was common. As children grew older, new dangers emerged. Farm work itself carried risks. Sharp tools, heavy loads, large animals, falling trees, collapsing structures. A moment's carelessness could result in serious injury. There were no emergency rooms, no ambulances, no modern surgical procedures. Recovery depended largely on luck, basic care, and the body's ability to heal. Disease remained the greatest threat. The Roman world contained numerous illnesses that physicians could neither fully understand nor effectively treat. Fevers swept through villages. Respiratory infections spread during colder months. Digestive illnesses emerged from contaminated food and water. Parasites were common. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. Many people suffered from chronic conditions that modern medicine would readily diagnose, but ancient physicians could only observe. The causes of disease were often misunderstood. Some illnesses were attributed to imbalances within the body. Others were linked to environmental conditions, divine displeasure, or supernatural influences. Roman medicine, while advanced in certain respects, lacked knowledge of microorganisms and infection. Doctors existed throughout the empire, but access varied greatly. Wealthy Romans could afford trained physicians. Peasants often relied upon local healers, family knowledge, herbal remedies, and religious practices. A sick family member might receive herbal treatments passed down through generations. Prayers could be offered to the gods. Protective amulets might be worn. Every available option was explored. Because when life hung in the balance, certainty was impossible to find. At times, disease spread beyond individual households. Entire regions could be affected by epidemics. The Roman Empire's extensive trade networks brought prosperity. They also helped diseases travel. Merchants, soldiers, and travelers carried illnesses from one region to another. A sickness that began hundreds of miles away could eventually arrive in a remote village. One of the most devastating examples occurred during the 2nd century AD. An epidemic known today as the Antonine Plague spread across the empire, killing vast numbers of people. Ancient writers described overflowing cemeteries, abandoned farms, and widespread fear. The exact nature of the disease remains debated by historians, but its impact was undeniable. For ordinary peasants, such events must have seemed terrifying. Neighbors became ill. Family members disappeared. Entire communities mourned together. And yet life continued. Fields still needed planting. Animals still required care. The living could not simply stop because death had arrived. Perhaps this necessity explains why Roman peasants developed a practical relationship with mortality. Death was feared, but it was also accepted. People understood that life could end unexpectedly. This understanding influenced how they viewed the world. The future was uncertain. The present mattered. The next harvest mattered. The health of family members mattered. Tomorrow was never guaranteed. When death finally came, funeral customs helped communities process loss. Practices varied across regions and periods, but honoring the dead was considered extremely important. Families gathered, ceremonies were performed, prayers were offered, memories were shared. The dead were not simply discarded, they were remembered. Many Romans believed that proper burial ensured peace for the deceased. Failure to perform appropriate rites could leave a spirit restless. As a result, funerals served both emotional and religious purposes. Even poor families often made considerable efforts to honor their loved ones. Simple grave markers appeared throughout the countryside. Some included inscriptions. Others contained only a name. Many have disappeared entirely. The vast majority of Roman peasants left behind no written record, no statue, no monument, no history book entry. Their existence survives only through fragments uncovered by archaeologists. A broken tool, a burial site, the remains of a home, a few scattered bones. Yet these fragments tell an important story. They remind us that behind the famous figures of Roman history stood millions of ordinary people, people who lived, worked, loved, suffered, and died much as we do today. People whose hopes and fears were every bit as real as those of emperors and generals. For the Roman peasant, death represented the final certainty in an uncertain world. But life was not measured only by beginnings and endings. It was measured by cycles, the changing seasons, the planting of crops, the growth of children, the passage of years. To truly understand how Roman peasants experienced time, we must step back and follow a family through an entire year. From the first signs of spring to the hardships of winter, from hope to harvest and back again. For it was the cycle of the seasons, more than any emperor or political event, that truly governed the lives of Rome's forgotten majority. The Roman peasant did not measure time by the reigns of emperors. He did not count years by political events in distant cities. He did not follow military campaigns on faraway frontiers. Instead, he measured time by the land, by the changing seasons, by planting and harvest, by rain and drought, by life and death. To understand the rhythm of peasant existence, let us imagine a single family living somewhere in the Roman Empire during the 2nd century AD. Their exact location is unimportant. Their experiences would be familiar to millions of others. The father works the fields. The mother manages the household. Their children contribute where they can. They own a few animals, cultivate a modest plot of land, and like countless families before them, they depend upon the success of the coming year. The cycle begins in spring. Winter is finally loosening its grip on the countryside. The days grow longer. The air becomes warmer. Across the fields, signs of life begin to appear. For the family, spring is a season of cautious optimism. The food stores accumulated during the previous harvest are running low. Every remaining sack of grain matters. Every preserved vegetable is carefully rationed. The family has survived the winter. Now they must prepare for the future. Work begins immediately. Fields damaged by winter weather require attention. Tools must be repaired. Fences need rebuilding. The soil must be prepared for planting. There is no time to waste. The success of the entire year depends upon what happens during these critical weeks. The father and older children spend long hours in the fields. Oxen pull wooden plows through the earth. Seeds are carefully scattered across freshly prepared ground. The family knows that once the seeds are planted, much of the outcome will depend upon forces beyond their control. Rain must come. Temperatures must remain favorable. Pests must be kept at bay. The gods, as they believe, must be willing. Meanwhile, the mother oversees countless tasks around the home. She tends the garden, prepares meals, repairs clothing, monitors food supplies, cares for younger children. Her work is no less essential than that performed in the fields. Together, the household functions as a single unit, each member contributing toward a common goal. As spring gives way to summer, the countryside changes dramatically. Fields that once appeared barren now burst with growth. Crops stretch toward the sun. Animals graze on fresh vegetation. The landscape appears vibrant and alive. Yet summer is not a season of rest. In many ways, it is the most demanding period of the year. The heat can be relentless. Work begins early in the morning before the worst temperatures arrive. Even so, labor remains exhausting. Weeds must be removed, fences repaired, livestock monitored, unexpected problems addressed. A storm can damage crops. Disease can spread among animals. Drought can threaten everything. The family remains vigilant. Every day brings new responsibilities. There are moments of joy. Children play when time permits. Neighbors gather occasionally for communal activities. Religious festivals provide welcome interruptions to routine. But beneath these moments lies a constant awareness that the harvest has not yet arrived. The year's fate remains uncertain. Then autumn comes. For Roman peasants, no season is more important. Months of labor have led to this moment. The harvest begins. Entire families enter the fields. Neighbors assist one another. Every available hand is needed. The pace is relentless. Grain must be cut and gathered. Olives collected. Grapes harvested. Food stored before weather conditions deteriorate. Long days become even longer. From sunrise until sunset, workers move through the fields. Children gather fallen grain. Adults load carts. The sounds of labor fill the countryside. Sickles slicing through stalks. Animals pulling heavy loads. Voices calling across the fields. The family works with urgency because they understand the stakes. This harvest must sustain them through the coming winter. It must provide seed for next year's planting. It must satisfy taxes, rents, and obligations. Every basket matters, every sack matters, every handful matters. Fortunately, this year has been good, not perfect. Few years ever are, but sufficient. The harvest is enough. Relief spreads through the household. For the first time in months, there is confidence that the family will survive another year. Food is processed and stored. Grain is protected from moisture. Olives are pressed into oil. Wine is produced. Vegetables are preserved. Preparations for winter begin almost immediately, because no season lasts forever. Soon colder winds arrive. Leaves fall from the trees. The days become shorter. Winter settles over the countryside. For modern observers, winter may seem like a quiet season. For Roman peasants, it remains a time of work. Buildings require maintenance. Animals need feeding. Tools need repair. Firewood must be gathered. Household tasks continue without interruption. Yet winter possesses a different atmosphere. Life moves indoors more frequently. Families spend more time together. Stories are shared. Repairs are completed. Plans are made for the coming year. There is also uncertainty. Food stores are gradually consumed. Each passing week reduces available supplies. A harsh winter could create hardship. Illness becomes more common. The family watches carefully, measuring grain, monitoring livestock, hoping that spring will arrive before resources run out. As the months pass, the cycle begins again. The first signs of warmer weather appear. The remaining food stores grow thin. Fields await planting. And once more, the family prepares for another year. Looking back, it is striking how little of this cycle depends upon events recorded in history books. The emperor may change, wars may be fought, governors may come and go, but for ordinary peasants, life remains governed by more immediate concerns. Weather, food, family, work, the seasons. Year after year, generation after generation, these rhythms continue. Children grow into adults. Adults grow old. New families take the place of old ones. The cycle endures, and through that cycle Rome itself endures, because every city must be fed, every army must be supplied, every empire depends upon the labor of ordinary people. The Roman peasant may never see the Senate, may never meet an emperor, may never witness the great events celebrated by historians, yet his work supports them all. The cycle of the seasons sustains the empire, and in many ways it is this humble cycle, not conquest, not politics, not power, that forms the true foundation of Roman civilization. As one year ends and another begins, we are left with a simple truth. The Roman Empire was not built solely by generals and rulers. It was built by families like this one, families whose names have long been forgotten, yet whose labor changed the course of history. And now, as our journey draws to a close, it is time to remember the people who made Rome possible. When we think of ancient Rome, we tend to think of greatness. We think of emperors standing before cheering crowds. We think of generals returning from distant campaigns. We think of marble temples, triumphal arches, mighty aqueducts, and vast arenas filled with spectators. History often presents Rome as a civilization of extraordinary achievements, and in many ways it was. Its armies conquered continents, its engineers transformed landscapes, its laws influenced generations, its culture shaped much of the world that followed. Yet throughout our journey we have focused not on the famous few, but on the forgotten many. The people whose names rarely appear in history books, the people who left behind few monuments, the people whose stories survive only in fragments buried beneath the soil, the peasants, the farmers, the laborers, the families who formed the overwhelming majority of the Roman population. Without them, none of Rome's achievements would have been possible. Every loaf of bread consumed in the capital began in a field worked by ordinary hands. Every military campaign depended upon food produced by rural communities. Every city relied upon supplies gathered, harvested, transported, and prepared by countless workers. The empire rested upon a foundation of labor, and that labor was performed largely by people history chose to forget. This is not unusual. Throughout human history, attention is often focused on rulers rather than workers, on conquerors rather than farmers, on those who commanded rather than those who obeyed. The names of emperors survive because they possessed power. The names of peasants vanished because they did not. Yet importance and fame are not the same thing. A man may be remembered without being essential. Another may be forgotten despite changing the world. The Roman peasant belonged to the second category. His contribution was immense, even if his name was not. Consider the life we have explored. A child born into uncertainty, a family struggling to secure enough food, long days spent working fields beneath the sun, marriage, children, and responsibility. Faith in gods who might offer protection, taxes paid to distant authorities, the possibility of military service, the constant presence of illness and death, the endless cycle of seasons. None of these experiences appear particularly glamorous. There are no triumphal processions, no political victories, no grand speeches preserved for future generations. And yet these experiences formed the reality of life for millions of people. For every emperor who ruled Rome, countless peasants rose before dawn and worked until sunset. For every senator debating policy, thousands of families worried about the next harvest. For every military commander planning campaigns, ordinary laborers planted crops that would feed his soldiers. The famous figures of history stood atop a vast structure built by others. The Roman peasant helped build that structure, not through extraordinary acts, but through ordinary ones, through persistence, through labor, through endurance. This may be the most remarkable aspect of their story, the fact that they continued, year after year, generation after generation, despite hardship, despite uncertainty, despite losses that would challenge anyone. They continued. When crops failed, they planted again. When family members died, they carried on. When taxes increased, they adapted. When wars disrupted their lives, they endured. Their resilience sustained communities across the empire. It sustained economies. It sustained governments. Ultimately, it sustained Rome itself. Today, many of the villages they inhabited have disappeared. Their homes have crumbled. Their fields have changed. The roads they traveled may lie buried beneath modern cities or forgotten landscapes. Most of their names are gone forever. But traces remain. Archaeologists uncover their tools, their pottery, their homes, their graves. Piece by piece, these discoveries allow us to reconstruct lives that might otherwise have been lost entirely. A worn sickle reveals years of labor. A child's burial reveals a family's grief. A simple cooking pot reveals daily routines. These small fragments speak quietly across 2,000 years, and what they tell us is surprisingly familiar, because despite the distance that separates us from the Roman world, these people were not so different from ourselves. They worried about their children, they hoped for good fortune, they feared illness, they sought happiness, they worked hard, they loved, they grieved, they dreamed about the future. The details of their lives may have differed from ours, but the fundamental human experience remains recognizable. Perhaps that is why their story matters. Not because they were famous, not because they changed history through dramatic actions, but because they remind us that history is ultimately the story of ordinary people. People who wake up each morning and do what they must to survive. People who build families, build communities, build civilizations, often without realizing the significance of their contributions. The Roman Empire eventually declined. Its political structures changed, its borders shifted, its armies disappeared. The world moved on. Yet the legacy of those ordinary people remains. Not in statues, not in palaces, not in chronicles written by elite historians, but in the simple truth that every great civilization depends upon the efforts of countless individuals whose names are never recorded. The Roman peasant was one of those individuals. He did not command legions, he did not govern provinces, he did not shape policy, yet he helped feed an empire. And that was enough. As we leave the Roman countryside for the final time, the image that remains is not of an emperor seated upon a throne. It is of a farmer standing in a field. Watching the sun rise over the land he must work. A husband returning home after a long day's labor. A mother preparing a meal for her family. Children running between rows of crops. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Lives that history often overlooks. Lives that made Rome possible. And perhaps, in remembering them, we gain a fuller understanding not only of the Roman Empire, but of humanity itself. Because behind every monument, every empire, and every chapter of history stand countless forgotten people whose labor made it all possible. This documentary has been their story. the story of the people who built Rome.